As a preface to today's jump into chapter 14, which is the 2-7 chord and then the 7-7 chord, I want to go back and review very quickly how the 5-7 resolved. So if we won't do the root position ones, which have those formulas of root to root and then strict or free resolution and such. But I do want to show you a what if scenario here. So I have a 5 chord right here. It's in 4-3 position, which means that the 5th is in the bass. And we're just going to go through the different parts and how they resolve to a 1 chord. And if you're looking at this video and you have no idea what we're talking about, the narrative characters that we have here are from Music 132, and so maybe you won't understand, but they help us remember. So here are the different actors. Here's our tritone right here. That's the princess, that's the prince. And the prince will step down and the princess will step up because this is a inverted chord, and so there is no free resolution. The bass root, which would be the king, is away on crusades or something, I don't know. And the 5th of the chord is the queen. She steps down to the root. And here's the root of the chord, which is not in the bass. If we were looking at a root position 5 chord, this would be the doubled root in an incomplete 5-7 chord. In this case, it's that uncle, or the drunkle as we call him, leans over and does nothing. And that's how we'd resolve it. So hopefully that's review. But what if it's a major 7th chord right there? Okay, I'll just grab a different pen real quick so you can see it in a different color. What if the 1 chord was not a 1 chord, but it had a major 7th or just a 7th on there? How would this change? And we would find that it doesn't change very much, but one part of the narrative does change. So the queen would still step down to there, right? The drunkle would still do nothing right there. The prince would probably step down because that's the 7th of the chord. There's a hard tendency to do that. And the princess, well, actually would just do nothing like that right there. Because there's an extra chord member, the 7th, it has to be grabbed by somebody. Now, this is not the only solution, and it's possible that this 7th will step up, but many times it just holds over and becomes the 7th of the new chord. And we touched on a circle of 5th sequence last year, or last term, where the prince would step down, 7th becomes the 3rd, the 3rd holds over and becomes the 7th, and then when it resolves on to the 4-7 chord, it would do the same thing where this, now the 3rd, would hold over and this, the 7th, would resolve down. So they just keep switching roles, and this is a sequence that we learn. Anyhow, keep that in mind, that when you're going from a chord here that goes a 5th away down, the 7th, if the new chord coming up has a 7th on it, sorry, the 3rd, if the new chord has a 7th on it, can just hold over and become the 3rd like that. So we get a few non-standard resolutions. Okay, so how does that fit with chapter 14, where they're talking about the 2 chord? I think one of the challenges of this chapter is that it doesn't have a clear-cut thing it wants you to do. In fact, it says right here, because of the large number of possible 7th chords in the minor mode, corresponding diagram, no, wait, hold on. Basically, this whole thing right here, after introducing it, is sort of apologizing because there's no formulas that can just be applied. Instead, they say, well, there's governing principles. So, and then, it goes through every possible example, because it's being thorough and that's good, I'm going to try and help. Cherry picks maybe got a negative connotation, but focus on a couple things with the 2 chord, because that's what we're going to do today, that you want to pay attention to. Right here, here's the guideline principles for writing 2/7 chords. 7th, that would be the equivalent of the Prince, steps down by step. We knew that. 7th, the chord can be approached in different ways. Okay, that's getting into it, and they love this a lot, you'll see. Incomplete chords, if you don't have everything in them, minimally have to have a root in the 7th, because the root tells us where the chord is located in the key, and the 7th tells us it's the 7th rather than a triad. I think, of course, the next most important note would be the 3rd, although, depending on the situation, even that semi-useless 5th can be the other chord tone. And then finally, double tones should not be the 7th or chord note or the leading tone. This is something we learned from the 5/7 chord, that tendency tones are leading tones and 7ths of chords, so we don't want to double those. Okay, with that in mind, what do we do now? Well, you get to read through the chapter, but I want to point out an area that you should focus on really starting to internalize and get to understand. It's this right here. Now, in previous terms, we spent a lot of time learning how to spell these guys, and you got very good at it actually, comparative to some other programs and people that I've seen. If all that work is stuck, great, but you should be able to calculate and make 2/7 chords, right? In minor, it's a minor 7th chord. In major, it's a minor 7 chord. And if we're in the minor key, it'll become a half diminished, which has a few other caveats. But we're just going to learn this right now. These are resolutions, and I just want to point out, well, let's start with this. 2 likes to go to 5, okay? If this was a 2/6 chord right here, we'd have a G, a B flat, and a D, and then this would be another G up here, right? And when we resolve this, the 3rd would go up like it's supposed to, the 5th would go down like it's supposed to, the drunkel right here would hold over, and now the 7th right here will just step down like it's supposed to, right there, right? So we can see that the members of the chords are doing what we'd expect them to do. Let's pop on over here to 2 going to a 5 with a 7th on it. Okay, so again, G is the root. It's sort of that drunkel there, holding over, doing nothing. Okay, the 7th of the chord right there steps down. The queen, the 5th of the chord, steps down just like she did. And here's my princess, the 3rd of the chord. And just like in the example with the 5/7 in inversion going to the 1/7 that I showed you on the whiteboard, it holds over and becomes the 7th of the new chord. Okay, so here's the thing we're looking for, right? Let's take a look over here. This is another inversion of the 2 with the 7th going to a 5 with the 7th. And 2s like to go to 5. So here's my root, it's my drunkel, holds over. There's my queen, she steps down. Here's my prince, he steps down, 7th, right? Root, 5th. And here's the 3rd of the chord again, which likes to just hold over and do nothing, right? Let's check out another one of these right here. This is with the 2 chord with the 7 in the bass, but I think you'll find it's really similar. The drunkel holds over, the 7th is the prince, it steps down. Here we have the queen, or the 5th of the chord, it steps down. And there's my 3rd of the chord again, the princess, and instead of going up like the tendency tone in the 5 chord would, it holds over like that right there and becomes the 7th, okay? Now, there's 2 other examples that we should pay attention to and look at very carefully. What do you do if you're going from a 2 to a 5, kind of like this here, but you have a 1/6/4 ahead of time as a cadence. That's pretty much the same as going to a 5 chord, except you have to readjust your targets to match the spelling of the 1/6/4. Or you could say, I'm going to the normal places for the 5 chord, but I will hold over or delay getting there because I'm going to put in my 1 chord notes. So let's pretend that the 1/6/4 doesn't exist for a minute, and I'm going 2/7 just to 5, right? Okay, so the root goes to the root, right? The queen, which is the 5th, steps down. That's normal, right? The 7th of the chord, it steps down as per normal. And the 3rd of the chord, princess, well, it has what we call free resolution because it would skip down to the 5th of that chord right there. So this is typical free resolution type, way of doing this. Now, all we do is say, well, the 1/6/4 would be an F, A, and a C, right? So still root to root steps down. Instead of jumping straight down from my free resolution of the 3rd, it steps into the 3rd of the chord, which then resolves down. And the Prince note right here, the 7th, instead of stepping down, holds over like a suspension figure into the 1/6/4 and down. In fact, you can see that one of the reasons why we call the 1/6/4 just more of a 5 is it's really just like a 5 chord right here with a passing note to get to it and a suspension to get to it. It's an ornamentation of that right there. Okay, so Prince holds over before stepping down. Princess does free resolution, but steps through the note of the 1/6/4. And then what about the 7 diminished chord in first inversion? Well, this is my 2/7 chord here, and you'll see that it does as little as possible, right? We have so many common tones here between, right? The root will hold over and become the 3rd there. The doubled root can do the same because we like to double the 3rd on this chord anyways, because it's a diminished chord. The princess just holds over and that steps down. The only thing that's missing out of a true 5 chord here would be the root, right? Which would be the C. And that's because it's a 7 chord, and we could probably even get a non-standard resolution to pull that up to grab the C if we wanted to. All right. Well, that's about it. What you should do now is you should read through the rest of the chapter for just the 2 chords. Listen to the different approaches and just get up right there. It seems like very little, but 7th chord or the 7 chord has a couple specific issues in it that we want to deal with on Friday when we have our Zoom meeting face to face. So if we can get up to there and you understand that, then jump ahead to the self-tests. And if you would please say, well, I can at least do self-test A and B right there. This is spelling these chords with their inversion, and it says use accidentals, not key signatures. So, I would make a print of this rather than, well, you could do it in your book if you want, but have that done. And then here it says analyze the chords and use the correct qualities and inversions. And then when we get to Friday for our Zoom meeting, we'll talk about the 7 chord and its intricacies. It's got a few thorny things about it, non-standard things, and then you can be set loose on the analysis and activities and self-test that are there. All right, that's it.